Guys, who will be there in your life when the bomb goes off? It's not a matter of if the bomb will go off, but when. Do you have a band of brothers that you can lean on to call you in to those dark places, to call you up to those higher levels, and to call you out when you're the cause of the bomb that's went off? Find out how to do that today on this episode. Men in the Arena Army, we salute you. Hey guys, thanks for listening to this episode of the Men in the Arena podcast. This is Jim Ramos. I'm here to be your guide and host of Spotify's #1 podcast for Christian men, guiding you to your best version in that stress bubble of life and beyond. But before we get into a great interview today, I want to talk to you about one of our hero stories. Again, we're collecting 365 stories of transformation this year. This one is number 93 from Jared. He emailed us and said, I'm going through a tough time right now. My wife of 15 years, so he's got a bomb that has gone off in his life. My wife of 15 years found another man and filed papers for divorce. I live in a rural area with no group of men to support me. The only good thing I have in my life right now is I found Jesus after running from him for years. I rededicated my life to Christ, and I am becoming the man that he wants me to be. Men in the Arena has been instrumental as I discover who I am as a follower of Jesus. He said, your Facebook community saved my life during the darkest time and has been the missing piece in my walk with God. So Jared, man, we're praying for you, praying that God will redeem your marriage, brother. And hit us up at info@meninthearena.org with your physical address. We'll send you some swag just to say thanks for being so open and vulnerable. Hey guys, stay tuned at the end of the episode today for our weekly Man Law. And guys, thanks again for making the Men in the Arena podcast Spotify's #1 podcast for Christian men. Hey, I want to bring on my new friend today, Jay Holland. Jay is a husband to Emily. He's the biological and adopted father of 4. He's a pastor in Stuart, Florida. He hosts the podcast Let's Parent on Purpose. So you guys got to go check that out. It's a podcast designed to strengthen marriage, parenting, and discipleship. It sounds like he's targeting the same guys we are. Super excited about that. So Jay spent the last 9 years of his life navigating the leukemia journey with his son, including his son's relapse and a bone marrow transplant. During his son's leukemia battle, he and his beautiful wife also adopted a special needs child from foster care. Speaking of beautiful wife, he's been married to his beautiful wife, Emily, of 16 years, but we're actually going to go beyond 16 years today and travel down another dark journey as he shares another point of grief in his life. But Jay, it's great to have you on the show, man.
Jim, that's what a kind introduction, and felt a little overwhelming hearing all of that. I didn't experience it all at one time, but putting it together in a sentence or two made me tired hearing it. But thank you so much for having me on. Love your podcast and love your ministry.
Well, man, I'm looking at your bio and I'm looking at what you're doing. It's you know, I have to keep telling guys that we're on the same team, man. And so I'm so excited when I read this. I go, man, this guy is on the same team. I mean, we're on the same side of the court. You're doing the same thing. You actually are working with teenagers, which I did for over 2.5 decades. And so I'm really excited to get to know you, man, and bring you on the show. And my goal is to talk less and listen more, which is, if that happens, we'll have a miracle today.
Yeah. And hey, we got, you're in Oregon, I'm in South Florida. So we've got, the country pretty triangulated there, so you got it covered.
I know, and hey, it's kind of a miracle. Both sides of the country have sun today.
Wow. Well, that's not a miracle for us, so that'll be a miracle on your side.
Trust me, it's a miracle for us.
Yeah, this is.
Well, I told somebody.
So I'm from West Virginia.
Oh, the land
I'm from West Virginia, and so normally, like when I go back there, it's Thanksgiving. And Jim, I didn't realize that I'm a seasonal depressant. Because, I think everybody in West Virginia just kind of stays depressed for a decent part of their life. But, I go back and it's Thanksgiving and I promise you, I'm driving up I-95, then we go over through and there's a big tunnel from Virginia into West Virginia. And the sun can be blue as can be, and you drive under that mountain. It's this huge mountain tunnel. And when you come out on the West Virginia side, it's gray. And I feel like it'll stay gray the entire time I'm there. And so after about 6 days of it, I'm like, honey, pack up. It's time to go. I'm going to be in a fetal position in the corner of the house if I don't see the sunshine sometimes.
Sucking my thumb and calling for mom.
I was a state snob and didn't like Florida. And then once I got down here, like, man, the sun is really nice. I
Well, I
could
got
get
to
used
tell
to
you, so
this.
I'm from California, so we have sun its sun is just there all the time.
Uh-huh.
But it's funny coming to Oregon. I it's been sunny here for a couple of days, and I had a guy going, a long time Oregonian, man, that sun, it's just killing me. And I said, you Oregonians, you guys are like Las Vegas Raiders fans. I've never seen somebody talk so much smack against their team, but a Raiders fan. They've got tattoos, their Raider tattoo on their arm, and they're just talking smack like they hate the Raiders. Oregonians are the same way. Oh, the sun, there's no sun, there's no sun. The sun comes up and they're like, I'm dying, I don't like the sun. So it's like, man, it's just so confusing. Well, anyway, hey, let's jump into our show today, man. Hey, you've got quite a story, man. And so your story involves grief. It involves healing. It involves death. It involves guys rallying around you to be the hands and feet of Jesus. So can we go back? I want to go back before you met Emily. I want to go back
Mhm.
to your first wife. And can you just go back to that point and then journey forward to your son today?
Yeah, I can. And as a matter of fact, if you don't mind, I'll actually start kind of back in my college years.
Yeah.
I went the beginning of my college. I actually had kind of made this my goal in life and worked towards it and got in there. And so I started my college at the United States Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs.
Oh, really?
And yeah, I did. Yeah, so wanted to fly, wanted to be a pilot, wanted to do all of that, and I also entered it dating a girl from my high school that I'd met and really fell in love with. And I knew that I was going to be spending 4 years away from her. And it's funny how quickly my pilot dreams changed because I was in basic training and I heard that fighter pilots are away from home 180 days a year
Whoa.
in peacetime. And I was like, nope, don't want to do that. Like, I'm going to be away from her for 4 years before I could even get married. I don't want to do that.
Wow.
And so it was just interesting. Like, the Lord, it was so quick how, like, just changed my heart because as much as I wanted to fly, I wanted to be a good husband
Mm-hmm.
and dad more than that, even at that age. But the big turning point in the academy was it was the first time I came in as a believer. I knew Jesus, I really did, but it was being stripped away from everything that I knew, being stripped away from my family and all of that. And the only thing I had was Jesus. And I remember those Gideons handing me that little New Testament
Yep.
Bible as I got off the bus and got that Bible. And about 6 seconds later, people were in my face screaming at me. And they did that for the next year solid. But I fell in love with that little Bible. And it was the first time that I committed to reading God's word every day. It was at the beginning of my freshman year at the Air Force Academy. The other thing that happened was it was the first time that I began to be surrounded by, and this was young men who intentionally pursued Jesus.
Wow.
And so, in the midst of this academy experience, it was the first time I really had a band of brothers who were calling me up to be more than what I was. And these guys just made it normal to pursue Jesus and to pursue him hard. And I remember there was this guy who was a sophomore who was kind of mentoring me some, and he would be like, well, yeah, I start my Bible study every day by reading a psalm or reading a proverb chapter and reading 5 psalms, and then I'll start my Bible study. I'm like, oh,
Oh,
well,
wow.
I guess that's what I'm supposed to do. So like, I didn't know that that was completely abnormal.
Yeah.
And I was just trying to keep up. And they were gracious with me, but they pushed me. And over the next 2 years of my life, God just changed my heart and changed my desires. And what at that point I was doing well in the academy, but what at that point became a real source of pride of like, I love this place and I could never leave it. Nothing would ever make me leave it.
Mm.
It was like the Holy Spirit just dropped this little seed in my heart, at this question of, well, Jay, what if I would ask you to leave? Would you do
Oh,
it then?
yeah.
And that question bugged me. I didn't have an answer to it. And so for months, I just wrestled through, well, what if God would ask me to leave? Would I do it? And then that morphed into, I think God might be asking me to leave. And I started
Oh,
really thinking about giving my life to full-time ministry. And I even tried to pursue the chaplaincy, and that door was not open from the academy. And then I started praying, God, just break my leg, like make me disqualified, and then I'll do whatever you want. But ultimately, it felt like I came to the point where I knew the Lord was telling me, Jay, if you're going to pursue a life of faith, then you're going to have to make a step of faith. And so, right before my junior year, I left the academy. I ended up going to Liberty University and graduating from there. And then 13 days after graduation from college, I married my high school sweetheart, Christy, and got my first youth pastor job in West Virginia. So we were young and poor as could be, and super happy. My first house, the kids in the youth group nicknamed it the Booger because that's what it looked like from the outside. But hey, man, I was a homeowner. I was 21 years old, and for
Wow.
$30,000 in 1999, bought a home that looked like a booger in West Virginia. But we were happy, and the Lord was growing our life, and had a lot of trials and up and downs. We were young and brought our young stupidity into marriage, but loved Jesus and saw some fruit. Our church got involved in India at that time. We started getting the privilege of taking teams back and forth to serve orphans in India. And my wife had a degree in missions, and she had a nursing degree, and I had a degree in biblical studies. So we committed to, after about 6.5 years of serving in that local church, we committed to leaving the comforts of our home and our family, and we were going to take ourselves and our little girl, who was 2 at the time, and move to India. And my wife was going to help medical
Whoa.
care with the orphans, and I was going to teach in the Bible college there. And man, was as excited as could be about it. Now, during that time, though, Jim, it was like I sat down with my senior pastor and told him my plans, and sometime within a week or two before or after that, my wife started getting sick.
Mm.
She started having some just real unexplainable bowel issues, and we thought she got a bug on one of our mission trips or something like that. Well, it just kept growing and kept getting bigger, and it was like that year, the more steps that we took towards India, the more her health fell apart.
Oh, wow.
And if you've ever been in a situation with somebody that starts to get in a long-term chronic sickness, it can it's not just the sickness, the physical health that starts to be involved. There's emotional issues, there's spiritual issues, and we began to really be in a meat grinder with all
Oh,
of that.
man.
For the first time in my life, I felt like I've got serious marriage problems, and I'm either going to be a missionary or divorced, and I don't understand this. And I honestly, Jim, I just wanted to die. I didn't want to kill myself.
Wow.
I just wanted a meteor to fall on me so that I could
Totally.
be done with this. We worked through and we wrestled through things, and at the same time, her health just completely fell apart. And finally, India was off the table, and so here we are, living in West Virginia, just grieving and disillusioned with that loss, but also just trying to figure out, okay, what are the pieces that we're going to pick up? What are we going to do next?
Mm-hmm.
And it felt like things stabilized a little bit, and then all of a sudden, her health just bottomed out even more. She had ulcerative
Oh.
colitis, which is very treatable for a lot of people, but she just threw bad reactions to all of the treatments. And so it ended up being in October of 2005. At this time, I think I was 28 years old, and so was she. We were in West Virginia, but found ourselves up in the Cleveland Clinic in Cleveland, Ohio, hoping to have surgery just to remove her colon and be done with this.
Mm-hmm.
And we're in the hospital for 2 weeks, and instead of having the surgery, she throws a massive MRSA infection in her bloodstream.
Oh.
And so now, like, her very blood is infected. So they cancel surgery. They put a PICC line in her chest. They put her on IV antibiotics, and then we go home. And we're supposed to do 4 weeks of treatment, and then come back for surgery. We left the hospital that morning about 9 a.m. And that night, probably about 9 p.m., I had collapsed and fallen asleep. And we were actually staying at her mom's house. And her mom comes and wakes me up. That my wife is moaning in the bathroom and the door's locked. And so we break in, and she collapses on the floor, and my high school sweetheart Christy ends up going to be with Jesus,
Oh, my
with me doing
gosh.
CPR on her
Oh.
on the floor of her mom's house.
Oh. And you're, I mean, still carrying those scars.
Yeah.
Oh, I can't
I
imagine.
can tell the story. And sometimes, like, it just gets a hold of you. It's been close to 20 years at this point.
Yeah.
Um, and I as we get into the rest of my story, I'm going to tell some things that like would compete for worst day. for people, but I can tell you, worst day of my life was the next morning when my little 3-year-old wakes up and
Oh,
asks, "Where's mommy?"
oh no.
And I hold her in my arms and say, "Mommy's not coming back. Mommy went to be with Jesus." And yeah, that was it. That was the worst of the worst. And
Oh,
we we had been through a lot. And Jim, I'll tell you, like, there's so much shock that happens with that, because if you've been married for some time, one of the things is you're going to go through rough patches of your marriage, but you kind of live in the anticipation of, I'm committed to this marriage and we're going to work out our stuff. It's going
yeah.
to take some time and we're going to work it out. And then all of a sudden, in a situation like this where the bomb blows up
Mm-hmm.
and like there's nobody to work it out with, um, like there's nobody there. And this by this point had been my best friend of 10 years. Um, but I can tell you this, like at rock bottom. And that was my first real experience with rock bottom.
Wow.
Real experience with rock bottom. Jesus was the rock, and he was there. And Jesus began to send people to me who had been in my life. That first week after she died, friends who we had, like, I had been their youth pastor, but I was only 3 years older than them when we started. And now
Yep.
they're coming and staying with me. And then the big thing was, I had this friend who we had been friends in college, just barely, but like we really liked each other, but didn't have a deep relationship. And he called and said, "Hey, I want to come visit, but my wife is saying I should wait till after the funeral and spend time with you when everybody goes home." And he came and actually moved into my house. And this guy now trains Muslim missionaries to the Muslim world, and he has spent a couple decades working in that field, and he's
Wow.
that kind of guy, and moved into my house. And it was like Jesus sent a brother who was a professional counselor and therapist to live with me and let me spew my vomit and cry and be angry and um, affirm that that was okay. And if I didn't have that, I don't know that I would have felt, as a pastor, it's like sometimes you feel like you have to have all of the right answers even in the
Yeah.
worst
Yep.
situations. And and my friend was like, "No, you sound like Psalm 88." And I went and looked up Psalm 88. And Jim, as far as I know, it's the only psalm that there's no resolution at the end. It's like, "God, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? I'm abandoned. I'm left alone." And then it basically ends with, "And darkness is my only friend."
Oh.
And when I went back and read that, I found so much comfort in the fact that, like, in scripture, there's a prayer to God that has no platitudes in it. None of this, "And I know you're going to work it out, Lord." But just the raw emotion of somebody who feels abandoned and just their soul torn in bits. And I felt such comfort and freedom in that like God not only sees that and hears that, but God affirmed that as scripture. And it was my brother that showed that to me.
Well, what's interesting,
And
yeah.
yeah,
What's interesting is I hear this cliche from Christians all the time. Oh, God will work it out, or God is in control. God's going to find a way. And the truth of the matter is sometimes God doesn't.
right.
But in the
Yeah.
midst of the way not being found, or in the midst of tragedy, in the midst of grief, God does what you said. He sends somebody to be your feet. So when you think of I think it's a First Corinthians, it's called God is called the God of all comfort.
Mm-hmm.
When you hear that verse, what do you think of there?
I'll tell you what I think of is the statement that it is a Christian myth of God will never give you more than you can handle.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like,
yeah,
dude, you've not been in my life, because he's given me more than I can handle all kinds of
yeah.
times. Why? Because that verse, the God of all comfort, says why? So that the comfort that we've been given, we may be able to comfort others with. I think it's 2 Corinthians 1, if I'm thinking right.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Second
and
Corinthians 1.
and
I had them flipped. Yes.
yeah, and and the truth is, like, I have been in situations over, the theme of my life is God giving me more than I can handle, so that I reach out to God, and also that I live a life of vulnerability that allows other people to minister to me.
Yes.
And what, as a man, sometimes sometimes the temptation is the, like, I can do it on my own.
Yes. Yes, it
Um,
is.
but when we live like that as men, first off, we rob other men of the joy and blessing of what God made them for. But secondly, it's not true. You can't do it on your own. It's a prideful statement, honestly, from the pit of hell,
Yep, for
and it's going to
sure.
lead you into all kinds of trouble.
Well,
So
yeah,
I
yeah.
experienced this, a friend coming when I was so raw and vulnerable I couldn't say no, and that just kind of opened this door. I ended up moving to Nashville, moving down to the church that he was involved in, and I served there. Um, right before I moved, I ended up taking my little girl, Brooklyn, to Disney World down in Florida. Um, and I had a friend who I had been his youth pastor, this guy who I knew lived kind of near Disney. And so I asked him, hey, do you want to come to Disney with your daughter with us? And I knew he and his wife really well, really loved them a lot. One of those where I was his pastor, but it was so close in age that, like, by the time we were done, we were among best friends.
Yep.
So he invites me to come and stay with him. And when he does, he mentions that his sister-in-law is single in that time. And my friend is one of these that, like, at the time, really high on discernment and super cynical in life. Like, he belonged to Jesus, but had a lot of cynicism and can point out people's issues and errors pretty quick.
Yeah.
But here's this girl that he's talking about that he can say nothing but the highest things about. And he's like, man, she really is incredible. And so, like, my brother, he was my brother in Jesus. Within a year, was my brother-in-law, because I'm in forever indebted to the fact that like he brought me a wife. He got me a wife. And so I met Emily, who was from down here. She was the older sister of his wife. I honestly did my very best scare story with her on the first date that we had together, which was like 6 days after meeting her.
Uh-huh.
And my story was like, so I'm, obviously I'm a widow and I have a little girl, and I have no interest of bringing girls in and out of her life. I am not moving to Florida. In the next few years of my life, there's a 30% chance that I'll live in Nashville. There's a 30% chance it will be in the Middle East. There's a 30% chance it'll be in Thailand. But if that doesn't scare you away, I think you're pretty awesome, and I'd like to pursue a relationship with you. And so, like, I just kind of laid it all on the line, and she was crazy enough to stick around. And in 2007, God blessed us to get married. She moved to Nashville within a year. Uh, you remember my "I will never move to
Oh
Florida"?
yeah. Well, how's the
Well,
weather down there in
well,
Florida?
it's nice a lot.
They
Actually, I
have a
live out
way.
there every
They have
time.
a
It's
way of
nice.
getting what they want, don't they? When a woman
Yeah.
sets her mind to something.
Well, let me tell you how she got what she wanted. Um, by laying everything she had on the line. And I can't
Oh.
even tell you it's what she wanted. The reason we're in Florida is because the week that I met Emily, she had bought a townhome down here at I think the peak of the market in like 2006, the peak day of the market.
Yeah.
We get married, and within just 6 months of being married, she's renting out the townhouse that she bought. And within 6 months, the market just absolutely collapsed. And we couldn't rent it for half of what the payment was. And my wife, who had spent years working two jobs, coming up with a down payment, had put $75,000 on this house, dropped it all the way down to where she would get no money out of it whatsoever. This is what she was willing to do for me to continue to live in Nashville and pastor in Nashville, because I had a heart and a commitment to that. She laid $75,000 down in the first year of our marriage for that. And yet we still couldn't get one person to come look at the house. And so it was like, well, I can't blame my wife. She's doing everything she can.
Mm-hmm.
The only honorable thing I know to do is go pay the mortgage, and I can't do that on a youth pastor salary from Nashville. So
Yeah.
we moved down here. I worked for her dad for the first year, doing wholesale produce. So I went from, like, my dream church job to loading produce trucks at 3 a.m. 6 days a week. and the Lord just forming and refining my character, but also eating healthy because I'm eating produce all the time.
It's free.
So God, yeah, that's great. God brought us to the church that I've been at. We got to join as a member within a year. They brought me on staff, and so I've been here at Covenant Fellowship for on staff for I think this is my 15th year that I'm on.
Wow.
And it's ended up being just the sweetest place that we could possibly
So
be.
I have a question, Jay, for you. So you're loading vegetables, you're working this weird shift. Yeah, you get to eat them for free or whatever, getting healthy. But where does obscurity play a role in the grief process? So clearly that was a season of obscurity for you, right? We see Moses going into the wilderness for 40 years. We see Paul doing the same thing. We see Elijah. We see these guys going into obscurity. Do you see that as a season of obscurity? Does obscurity play a role in the grieving process?
That's a great question. I think it does. When my wife first died, within a week, I resigned from my job, and I spent 9 months just grieving and healing and not being an official anything, just being a member of my home church, drained all meager savings that I had and lived off of it. But yeah, I think I wasn't quite ready. I mean, I think I could have done well with it, but I think the Lord did a lot in that time. And one of the really interesting things was right before I moved, I was in Nashville at a meeting with some businessmen who I had just like begun a small men's group with.
Mm-hmm.
And I was moaning and whining about moving to South Florida. And I was telling them, I'm at a church that loves missions. I'm at a church that has a heart for the world. It's some of the greatest preaching that I've ever heard. And I'm going to the naked state where nobody can keep their clothes on, and everybody I've ever met is addicted to recreation. And I don't know anybody that's seriously following Jesus. And one of these businessmen, I remember he just had these big hairy arms, and he had a mulch business that supplied Lowe's and Home Depot. And he pointed his finger at me, and he's like, look, you're sitting here saying that you want God to use you, and you were willing to go as a missionary to the other side of the world. And you're saying that you're in a place that has everything, and you are moving to a place that doesn't have any of it, and you're complaining about it. God's sending you to the very thing that needs to be done, and maybe you're part of the piece that needs to fix it.
Wow.
And it was just really humbling to me. So I kind of had that in my heart. And what was the interesting thing, Jim, is when you go load produce at I think the job started at 3 a.m. every day, 6 days a week.
Holy cow.
I had wanted to do missions. It was like 10, 12-hour shifts every day. So you load produce, then you drive a box truck and you drop it off. And it was really humbling because, like here I am with a college degree and I'm screwing up a cantaloupe and a honeydew at 3:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
And I'm being made fun of by this dock worker who didn't graduate high school. And I'm wanting to be like, don't you know me? I'm the boss's son-in-law, but I'm not going to do that because I don't know the difference between a honeydew and a coconut. But also the nations were on that dock. I was working with guys from Jamaica, from Honduras, from Palestine, from all over the place. And they didn't know me as Pastor Jay. They just knew me as Jay. And so like I had to establish the ability to talk to them about Jesus by working hard and by having integrity with my mouth and by doing what I was going to say and by encouraging them as men. And then maybe as we're driving in a truck together, they might listen if I start telling my story about Jesus. So that was really good for me. It was really, really good for me. I think it's good for every pastor to have to work a regular job so that we don't pout and complain about pastor jobs sometimes. Pastor jobs are hard, but so is every job.
Well, it's really interesting. So Teddy Roosevelt, when he was president way back when, he was a guy who taught Sunday school. A kid came into his class. The kid had a black eye or a bloody lip. And he said, what happened? He said, a bully picked on my little sister, so I punched him in the eye. Teddy Roosevelt gave him $1 for doing it. And then the superintendent of Sunday school kicked Teddy Roosevelt out of the Sunday school class as a teacher. And Teddy Roosevelt, as president, talked about how Christian men tend to be intellectually strong but soft in every other way and not even able to carry a conversation with the dock workers of the world. And I think there's something to be said of these guys that go out during the work day and they're working with construction guys and dock workers and all these guys. And they come into the church and they're thriving with Jesus because they're used to thriving in a hostile environment where pastors, we're in a pretty safe environment. We're around Christians all the time. So I think there's something to that. So far in your story, you talked about your buddy at the Air Force Academy getting in the Word and calling you up. You've talked about your mulch guy calling you out. So I'm wanting to hear a story about somebody calling you, and I'm sure it's common. I'm sure somebody's going to call you in here. I'm sure that's going to happen. So you're married to Emily.
Married to Emily.
Yes.
We have two little boys together. Emily adopts my daughter Brooklyn, so we're a family of three, and actually we're a family of 2.5 at this time. Emily's pregnant with Micah, and Emily and I are out to eat at Cracker Barrel for a little morning date, and she's telling me about this book that she read. I think it's called Renting Lacey, and it was about the number of people in the foster system who end up getting trafficked, who end up getting involved in human trafficking. And it's just breaking her heart reading this. Emily just has such a tender heart for the Lord and a heart for those who are down. And so we're at Cracker Barrel and we're eating. And Emily starts telling me about this and she starts weeping and crying. And like, I really feel like we need to be fostering, we need to be helping rescue people from this. And I'm like, Emily, you got to stop crying. Like people are I'm sitting at breakfast with a pregnant woman crying. I'm going to look like a monster. Can you please, we can foster, we can do whatever you want.
Yeah, just stop crying.
Don't make me look like the guy making his pregnant wife cry at Cracker Barrel. So
yeah, that's funny.
But yeah, I mean, I wanted to foster as well. We jumped in, we did the training, we had Micah, and he was a little baby when we got into the foster system. A few years go by, my boys are at that time 5 and 3, and we have a little girl that we got at 1 year old, but we were the 5th family in her life by her first birthday. And a lot of challenges really start coming out. And she was taken from the hospital, removed from her parents from the hospital, and then family after family, and a couple of those families divorced in the year they had her. So she just suffered a tremendous amount of neglect and a lot of really sad wiring in her brain during that time. And so we're pretty early in it, and things are already starting to kind of, we're dealing with things that we don't understand. But by this point, we've committed to the adoption process. And Jim, we're like within a month of the adoption being final, and my son Elijah spikes a 105-degree fever one Sunday evening, which, I mean, we have 4 kids, so you're used to high fevers. This is totally rodeo with this. The next morning, he's got a fever and it feels like pneumonia. So we're like, okay, well, we need penicillin. And so we try to get him into the doctor to just get some antibiotics so we can go home. And we can't get him into the doctor. They say go to the emergency room. We're embarrassed to go to the emergency room for a fever. And then we hear the news that changed the trajectory of our life. I mean, I remember sitting in that room, and the doctor comes in and he looks at me and my wife and he says, "This makes me sick to my stomach to say, but it looks like your little boy has leukemia, and there's an ambulance pulling out front to take him to the children's hospital right down the road. He's in really bad shape." And so
is he the 5-year-old or the 3-year-old?
He's 5 at the time. Elijah's 5. His little brother is 4 or 3. They're 18 months apart. And then their little foster sister is 16 months younger than that. So I think she was 1.5 or 2. And then his older sister, Brooklyn, who's just in 6th grade and as sweet as can be, is up north getting a puppy with her grandparents while her brother contracts leukemia. And so we got, I didn't even know what leukemia was. I mean, I knew it was bad, and I didn't know it was a blood cancer at the time. Elijah is diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia, which I learned is the most common childhood cancer. So that's good because they know how to treat it pretty well. But it's a very aggressive cancer, and he ended up I mean, as a 5-year-old little boy, I think he had 5 or 6 units of blood in that first day in the
Oh,
hospital. And I think it was 85 or 90% of his bone marrow was leukemic cells, and 30% of all of the blood in his body was leukemia by this point. And so, I mean, had we waited another day, he could have died. And
oh
these
my
are, and it's
gosh.
like a week before he seemed fine, and then the next week he's on death's door. And so, you're in absolute shock at this time. Um, but I remember something, Jim, as I'm in the back of the ambulance with him. Um, we're going we're going from one hospital to a children's hospital, and I've told a couple of people, I've called my parents, I've texted the staff at church, and all of a sudden I start getting texts from these different men saying, hey, Rod texts me, hey, just tell Elijah I'm praying for him and I love you. And Bob does that, and another one. And um and the guy in the ambulance, in the back of the ambulance, because I'm reading these to Elijah as we're
Mm-hmm,
going
mm-hmm.
down. Hey, Rod just wants you to know that he loves you. Um, and the guy in the ambulance, like, looks like you guys got a lot of people that really care about you. And I remember turning to him and saying, "Yeah, we really do." And I asked him. I said, "Do you have?" I said, "These are the people from our church." And I asked him, "Do you have a church family?" And he said, "No. We've looked around a little bit, but we just haven't done it." And I remember saying to him, this isn't the only reason, because I think following Jesus is the main reason. But man, let me tell you, there's going to come a time in your life where the bomb goes off.
Mm.
And when the bomb goes off, you're going to need some men in your life. And when the bomb goes off is too late to find those men. Like, you need to invest in that ahead of time. And it's funny because it was a side conversation. And I don't remember many conversations from my life, honestly, but I
Wow.
remember that one because it feels like what a good theme that I have been graced by God to experience as a man is,
Wow.
when these bombs have gone off, God has graciously surrounded me with men who carry me and my family through that time. And so we experienced it again with Elijah's initial leukemia treatment. We had a group of people come in and, like, extreme makeover, renovate our house to make it safe for him to be there and to tear out carpeting. They installed a hypoallergenic air conditioning system to kill bacteria and viruses in our house. I had men just come and take me from the hospital to go sit with me and talk and let me cry and grieve.
Wow.
And this was our experience of, like, in the worst of the worst, being loved so deeply that there was no doubt that God was involved in this. There was no doubt that we could ever say we are alone or abandoned, because of the brothers, and for my wife, the sisters that were in our life and surrounded our life during this time.
There's just so much I want to say to that. John 13:34-35, Jesus is talking to the disciples the day before he gets killed, right? And he says, and this is what brought up when you spoke. He said, "This is how they will know that you are my disciples, that you love one another." And honestly, the church is broken in a lot of ways. Yes, we're filled with hypocrites because we're all broken people. But the bottom line, I think the thing that the church brings to the table that no other entity in the world brings is a tight community of people who love each other and want the best. So what I'm hearing you started off the podcast, and this isn't in my notes, I'm just going with the flow right now. You talk about a guy who called you up when he was reading his Bible study. He called you up in your faith in Jesus. Then you have the mulch guy. He called you out about your work on the docks. He called you out and reminded you of what God is doing and what God has called you to. And then you had your wife called you in to the adoption process. And literally, when you're in the ambulance, you have all of your Christian brothers going into your dark place and calling you, and they're calling you into that with them. And so there's such a beauty here, because I think so many dudes today are half-baked, right? They've got guys that call them out. Maybe they have a guy over here that calls them up, but these guys are usually not getting all three. They're not getting the three tiers of being called up to a higher level, being called out for their stupidity and their wrong views on life, and being called into the deeper, darker places that, let's be honest, Jay, most guys, we don't want to go there, until we're forced there.
I was actually talking to a brother today, and I said, I think one of the bravest things that men can do is be vulnerable
Yep.
because we spend our whole life, I got this, I got to do this. Like,
Yep.
you need to be tough, and you do need to be tough. Like, you can't make it through this world without being tough. But at the same time, if you're not vulnerable, what is it? He who thinks he stands, take heed lest he fall. And
Yes.
and if I'm not willing to share my weaknesses with some men that I can trust, then I am just on the trap of the devil, waiting to be devoured. And Jim, I'll tell you that for me, kind of the I don't know, the sweetest example of this, or maybe it's just the sweetest because it's my current example. Let me fast forward a little bit. We go through 3.5 years of treatment. It's a bear. It's an absolute beast. They nearly put your kid on death's door in order to cure this leukemia. And so Elijah is cancer free. We go through 3.5 years of treatment, and then Elijah is cancer free for 4 years. And then in September of 2021, he spiked a little fever. He had a little bone pain. We go to get it checked out, and are just floored to find out that he has relapsed at this point. And people have asked, like, what's the difference in hearing cancer the first time and hearing relapse? And the best way that I know to describe it, it's like that first diagnosis of cancer is like being blindsided by a bus that you never knew was coming. But that word relapse is like the monster that had been tapping on your window every day since you heard the first one. And it's tapping and tapping, and now all of a sudden it is taken up residence inside your soul. And I'll tell you that for me, the relapse hit heavier and darker than the initial one did.
Oh, man.
And there were a few reasons for that. One was, like, I was never afraid of leukemia before it started, and now all of a sudden, it's there's not been a day in the last 7 years before the relapse that I haven't thought about it. It's a constant, even in gratitude of, thank you God that my son is alive. Thank you God that my son is alive, because leukemia hasn't killed him. So I know I've been thinking about it, and here it is. Plus, a teenager's body does not bounce back like a 5-year-old's body to these extreme treatments. Plus, we were going through it in the midst of COVID. In 2021, the hospitals were still basically in lockdown, where mom and dad could come in and nobody else. And I remember some of the sweetest times being a band of 50 of his friends and family standing outside the hospital window, holding up banners and signs, just saying, "Hey, we love you," because they couldn't come in and be with him. And it was during that time, that first month of treatment, that I had a group of guys. One of them was my brother-in-law that I've already told you about. He got me a wife, so really loved him, have stayed close to him, and we've grown together a ton. But a couple other guys that had gotten involved in, we're all dads. We have kids of the same age. They've all come in and they serve in our student ministry together. And I just remember reaching out in a text to them about a week after his relapse. I'm in the hospital. My son has these horrible migraines, so the room is dark all of the time. He doesn't want to talk. And there's just hours and hours of being alone at night. And I said to these guys, "Hey, I'm in a hard spot. I'm in a dark place, and I'm alone in this room, and Elijah's asleep night after night. And I just don't want to go down a trail where I start looking at things out of comfort that are going to devastate me and my wife. And so I just need you guys to ask me what I'm looking at." It's funny because, I know that Jesus is watching. I know that, I know Psalm 139. I've got it memorized. I know that he knows when I sit down and when I rise up, and he understands my thoughts from afar, and there's nowhere I can go without him. But there's something about having a group of guys ask, "Hey, Jay, what are you looking at? How were you tonight?" That helped in those times of temptation. And what was really sweet about these guys is that instead of it becoming an accountability group, I would say it became a life group.
Yep.
Accountability was just one aspect of it. And we have, one of the guys, Dave, is just so incredible about first thing in the morning, sending some kind of encouraging text of what he's reading in God's word. And so that simple request in September of 2021 has started a string where I don't think that we've missed 3 or 4 days of texting one another first thing in the morning, of encouragement to one another, of what we are reading in God's word, of just not even waiting to be asked, but openly confessing, I've really been struggling with this. And it has ended up forming into where now every Friday, we check in with one another and we walk through a specific set of questions with one another of like, I don't just want accountability with my lust and thought life. I want a group of men to hold me up in all of the areas of my life. And so we kind of share with one another every week, is Jesus being honored in the way that I'm treating people at work and in the way that I work? Have I been upright in my financial dealings with people? Have I shared the gospel this week? Have I had any tempting or flirtatious thoughts that would not glorify God, or expose myself to any material that would not glorify God? A couple of others in there, like, has anything robbed me of my joy this week?
I got to interrupt you. Because you're quoting right out of my friend Rod Handley's book, Character That Counts. Aren't you? You are, aren't you? Huh?
Some student brought these to me years ago.
That's Rod Handley's.
I started doing them with students, and I was like, I want to do a podcast on this. And so I went through, like, oh shoot, these are copyrighted.
I just did a podcast. Just say it was Rod Handley. The last question is, did you just lie to me?
Yep.
Yeah. So that's my friend Rod Handley. Yeah, he's out of Kansas. He's out of St. Louis, or Kansas City, Missouri. Yeah. Anyway, that's so funny. I'll have to tell him that. I just recorded a podcast on those 10 things. Oh, that is so funny.
Let me be a commercial to every man listening. They've heard it twice now, right? If they listen to that one and they listen to this one. How many times is God trying to tell you something before you should act on it? Because that's not a coincidence.
No, that's just too funny.
And this is something that, it's a ton of vulnerability to do this. But also, I think for many guys, it's welcome, because whenever we hear accountability, all we think about is, well, it's because, I don't want to be a pervert and I don't want to look at porn, right?
Yeah.
But the truth is that my walk with Jesus is so much more than my eyeballs and my lustful thought life. And I cannot grow in the Lord if all I'm thinking about is not looking at bad things. I need to be an honorable man in all of these other areas of life. And truthfully, the more I put myself to the other questions, generally, the less that one question is uncomfortable, because like, it's in the way, like that those temptations they're in the way of who I want to be and what I want to do. And when you end up getting a group of guys who are willing to buy into that, man, it's like rocket fuel on your spiritual life and your emotional well-being to do that. And so that's kind of where I am right now in experiencing this. And tell your buddy, his questions have permeated South Florida, because they were brought to me by a student in our group, and they've come to me, and then they've gone out to others, and they're good.
That is just, he's going to love that. He's a great guy. Well, it's really interesting, because there's, on one side, there is protecting yourself while in the darkness, like focusing on the darkness, like i.e., don't do porn. But that's not Christianity. Christianity is pursue Jesus. So you pursue the light, and anything that's going to get in the way of the light, you expose to the light, right? So the fact that you've exposed that temptation is bringing light to you. And I want to go back to temptation real quick, because you said that God will give you things that you can't handle. And people who say that God won't are misquoting 1 Corinthians 10:13. 1 Corinthians 10:13 says, no temptation has seized you but that which is common to man, and God is faithful. When you're tempted to sin, God will provide a way for you to escape out from under it. So that verse has nothing to do with pain. It has nothing to do with pain. So, we're at the end of our conversation here today, man. But, I was thinking about what you were saying just now. And there is a verse in Proverbs that says, there is a friend who is closer than a brother. And it sounds like you're talking about that guy.
Yeah.
So that's so good. So what
I see Jesus modeled in my friends. And and what I really like, I think one of the best things about it is when we encourage one another. My friends are so quick to say, "But man, you should see me without Jesus."
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
you should see what my life is like without Jesus. And so like that's such an encouragement is getting humble guys, and it takes a while. You know, it really does. It takes a while. But you get there by being vulnerable yourself. You get there by like some guy has to be the first guy to say, "Hey man, I need this." And then you can see what the Lord's going to.
Well, you know, I think what I'm hearing today, Jay, is that the bomb will go off. It'll either go off with situations you cannot control, a wife with a chronic illness, a son with a leukemia, or it'll go off because you're just a jackweed and you're doing stupid stuff. So the bomb is going to go off, but we need to have a band of brothers around us to call us out, to call us in, and to call us up when the bomb goes up. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
I think that's a great summary you need a band of brothers because there's not any one man that can model all of Jesus. Because you get a bunch of us together, we start filling out all of the beautiful aspects of our Savior, and that's a pretty cool experience.
That's really I love how you said that, because all of us together begin to bring out the various attributes of Jesus. That's cool. So hey, the most important question today: how's your boy?
Man, this is a really special week for us. This past Friday, we had surgery to remove his port.
Wow, praise the Lord.
Which is the official signal. That is 1 year after the bone marrow transplant. We had a test, and he is cancer-free down to 1 in 10 million cells. If you take my son's blood, it's the exact perfect DNA of his little brother, who was his perfect sibling match, and saved his life. And so I got two boys that are united in spirit and united in blood. And this is the sweetest season of life as we just celebrate every day and get to do dad and son things.
Gosh, well, praise the Lord, man. I will just keep praying for your boy. And hey, so let's kind of circle back here a little bit. How do our guys get a hold of your podcast? What's the best way to access that?
Yeah. Okay. Two best things I'll tell them is Let's Parent on Purpose is a podcast that's on every podcast platform, Apple Podcast, Spotify. It's actually produced and hosted by christianparenting.org. So you can find it there as well. But I also send out a weekly email of just things that I like, things that I found that have been helpful for me in my marriage, in my parenting, and in my discipleship. That email is called Things for Thursday. And if somebody signs up for it, I send them a few things right on the front end. There's a marriage snapshot tool that you can do on a single date with you and your wife to kind of just get a picture of where you are. There's a Fun Family Conversations ebook to help you with really good guided conversations with your kids around the dinner table or at bedtime. I also have a marriage visioning packet in there where if you get a weekend away with your wife, you can kind of dream and explore what is our mission as a household together. So all of that is free, and you can get that by texting the word things, THINGS, to 66866. That's things to 66866. And then I'll let you know every week. I tell you what I'm talking about on the podcast, which will include Jim here very soon. I'm excited to have you on.
Yeah, we're going to talk about how to parent through the stupid years. So that'll drive guys right to your stuff, man. I'm telling you what. Hey, Jay, it's been so good to have you on the show, man, and to see and experience your heart, and just to hear how men in your life have helped you when the bomb went off. So God bless, man. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you, brother.
Guys, our man law this week is man law 18 in my book, Man Laws, 101 Ways to Get Your Man Card Revoked and Rules to Live By. You can find that on our website. It's a free download for you. Man law number 18 is simply this: never share an umbrella, bathroom unless it's public, clothing unless it's hunting gear, or the back seat of a motorcycle. And I would say also never share a space in bench seats of your truck. Always leave a gap there, guys. So the life rule, guys, is build healthy relationships with other men. Healthy relationships. Hey, guys, if today's podcast has helped you, make sure you click the subscribe button on your podcast app and you are following us. Many guys listen to the show but never subscribe. When you subscribe, it raises our numbers. It helps us to impact more guys. So, man, please subscribe to the Men in the Arena podcast, Spotify's #1 podcast for Christian men. Until next time, Feel the wet sand on the arena floor. Hear the deafening roar of the crowd. Taste the sweetness of victory. Smell the stench of battle. Get in the game, get dirty, grind it out, and be a man.